All right, so this presentation is going to be all about Coach Weigand's hot spring experiences. And I will tell you right up front that I just dig hot springs. I don't know why, but I've always just thought they were cool or hot. And I've spent a lot of my time going out and finding these hot springs and exploring them and checking them out. So I'm going to share some of my experiences with you that aren't necessarily academic kind of things, but they are related to hot springs. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you'll have some questions, and I'm going to ask you to tell me things you learned from this presentation and even ask questions. Your instructions is just to watch and listen to this carefully. You're going to be given a quiz tomorrow. You do not have to take notes. Do not take notes. You can't possibly write down everything that I am saying, and you'll notice that I'm talking very fast here, and you might even have to play this on double speed to get through this in one class period. So just listen, pay attention. Tomorrow you have the chance to prove to me that, hey, I learned something from this. Here are places that I visited hot springs in North America, and you can see I've been to a lot of them. Notice most of them are in the West, which you know to be true, and even in 2020, these here that I'm circling, these are all ones that I went to in 2020. So I'm constantly looking for these hot springs and checking them out. First of all, I'm going to go through some of the places that I visited in the United States of America. First of all, state of Nevada. I'm going to show you a picture of the state, kind of give you an idea where these are. Here's Goldstrike Hot Springs, just a little itty bitty pool in a canyon. Doesn't look like much, but it's basically a free natural hot tub. Let's go to California because there's a lot of hot springs in California. I've had a lot of experiences there. This is Death Valley in California, and it doesn't rain in Death Valley, but what happens is the rain hits the mountains and then it pops up over here in the low point in Death Valley. But in doing so, there's heat in the ground. There's some of that friction from mountain building and leftover volcanoes that when the water comes up, it's warm, and that is a hot spring. It's actually called TECOPA Hot Springs, a little town there. I went in 2012 and I went and I sat in it. It has a very muddy bottom, and you see I scooped up some of the mud right here. Now, there are a lot of spas and resorts right in this area that actually tap into the hot springs, and they do things like mud or mineral baths. It's supposed to be good for the skin. If you've ever been to a spa and got one of those, like, you see people getting kind of the mud wraps and face packs and all that kind of stuff, that's what they do there. It's for the mud from the mud that comes out of the natural hot spring. I'm in the natural hot spring. I didn't go to one of the resorts. Here, I went back in 2018 at Christmas with a buddy of mine, and at that point, I started taking the obligatory Coach Weigand hot spring selfie, because by that time, I've certainly got a cell phone camera, and you're going to see that as kind of being a theme throughout this presentation. When I got out of that hot spring, my wedding band had turned gold. My wedding band is silver. But remember that hot springs have a lot of minerals in them, and the minerals in the hot spring reacted with the silver metal in my wedding band, because silver is a very reactive metal. It will react with minerals very easily. That's why silver tarnishes and you typically have to polish it. Well, it instantly went from silver to this kind of bronzy color because it reacted with the minerals in the hot spring. It eventually wore off. I just had to polish my wedding band, but that shows you how many minerals are in the hot spring water. Here's the Sierra Nevada mountains of California, Mono Lake and Mammoth Lakes area, and you'll notice the hot spring was popping up out of the ground over here, and I had my thermometer with me. It was 147 degrees. That's really, really hot. I mean, that's going to cook you kind of hot. So what they did was they ran a little pipe over here. Somebody improvised this and made it basically into a little natural hot tub, and they let the water cool down to about 107. When it gets too cool, when this water goes a little cold down here, they just open up this pipe and they let more hot water in. And of course, we're adding to the collection of Coach Weigand hot spring selfies. This particular pool was a little bit further away from the other one, and it was 101.9. I've gotten in the habit of taking this little thermometer with me just so I kind of see what the temperature of the hot springs are. Here I'm in Bridgeport, California, and I showed you this in the hot spring presentation before. This is Travertine Hot Springs, and you can see all the big pile of minerals that the hot spring deposits. This is that Grover Hot Springs, one of the first ones that I showed you as the introduction to hot springs. And I want you to notice here, look how kind of nasty looking their swimming pool is. It looks dirty, it looks grimy, but it isn't. Because this is hot spring water and it's got so many minerals in it, it's really, really hard to keep it looking clean. Now, it's not dirt like bacteria or poop or, fungus or anything like that. It's simply minerals from the hot spring that coat the pool, and it gives it kind of a dingy look because of all the minerals in the water. So I went to Colorado. I've been to a couple hot springs there, including 2 back in summer of 2020. Glenwood, Colorado is notable because there's a huge hot spring there, and it's right beside railroad tracks. And they took it and capped it and put all the water into this big, huge swimming pool here. It is now the largest hot spring pool in the United States. That entire pool is heated by hot spring water, which means it's hot, and it is hot year-round. Now, Colorado is cold. It's up in the mountains. It's pretty far north. In the wintertime, you can go there and swim in that pool outdoors because the water is still hot from the hot springs. This was right on the Transcontinental Railroad, and it turned into a really, really, really big vacation town because as the trains were going from the East Coast to the West Coast, they would stop there, and people would spend the night in the hotel, and they would take in the heated swimming pool, which was unheard of 100 years ago. 150 years ago. It's unheard of now. You would never ever have a heated swimming pool that big, especially outside. It's just too expensive. But if you've got free hot water, sure, why not? Make a big heated swimming pool. Now, Steamboat Springs is a little bit closer, and I want to show you a video here. Here's what the water looks like coming up out of the ground. They got the name Steamboat Spring because some of the springs, when they go glump, 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 and water coming to the surface, people thought it sounded like an old steamboat or steamships, hence the name Steamboat Springs. Now, same thing here. This is in Colorado. They have a great outdoor heated swimming pool, and you can see here some of the slides from it right here, and it's open year-round. You can go there in the middle of winter, and you can still swim outside because they have free heated hot water that comes up out of the ground. It's one of the things you can do with hot spring water. Penny Hot Springs. This is a little more rustic. This is one that has not been developed. The water coming up out of the ground, and I made myself mad because I forgot my thermometer. That water right there was too hot to even touch. You couldn't stand it. And I'd guess in the 150 degrees or more. So what they did is they let the water run downhill, and it runs over here into the river, which is cold water. So if they let the hot spring water mix with the cold spring water and people stacked up the stones, you got like a little free natural hot tub there. Now my wife got in, and Mrs. Coach Weigand only wears silver jewelry. Notice that's not silver. What happened with her silver rings is the same thing that happened to my wedding band previously. The silver reacted with the minerals in the hot spring water, and it tarnished them. So she had to get them cleaned to get all the reaction from the minerals in the hot spring off of her rings and turn them silver again. Been to Montana, been to one hot spring in Montana. What's notable about the one hot spring in Montana is that it was developed into a spa. It was developed into a town where people used to go and what they call take in the waters. Notice their slogan right on the sign there, home of the healing waters. You limp in and you leap out. And we had this discussion about how hot springs were developed into spas and hospitals and resorts because the thought was the hot spring water was good for you. And sure, why not? Think about 150 years ago, before everybody could take a hot bath. This was a place where you could go and take a hot bath. You didn't have to burn coal or burn wood to make your water hot. It was coming up out of the ground naturally. So here's what the resort looked like. Basically, you and me, it looks like a bathroom. You had a locker room basically, and each little stall had a bathtub in it. Doesn't look like much, and it really isn't now, but 150 years ago, actually now maybe almost, certainly 150 years ago, 100 years ago, when you didn't have indoor plumbing and you certainly didn't have indoor hot water, you could go to this hotel and you could draw a nice warm bath. Now, they also have their hot tubs and their swimming pools filled up with it. Now, people don't go there necessarily for therapy anymore. It's still nice to go and take in the waters and soak in the mineral pools, but it's not as big a deal as it was 150 years ago before everybody had indoor hot water. Now, the water in Hot Springs, Montana is said to be the hardest or the second hardest water in the world. It has an incredible amount of minerals in it. And that's one of the reasons why it was sought after for their healing properties, because it was thought that the more minerals it had, the better it was for you. And it did a number on my wedding band. Again, you can see here's my normal appearance, and there's what it looked like after I got out of the hot spring water there. You can see it's almost black. And same thing, the silver in my wedding band reacted with the minerals in the hot water. Been to a couple in Wyoming. Thermopolis, Wyoming is one of the largest mineral hot springs in the world. And there are about 27 different minerals that come out of that water. So it's really, really heavily laden with minerals. And when the water comes to the surface, it drops those minerals. There's big piles of minerals all over the place. And this spring gives out 3.6 million gallons of water every day, 365 days a year. And it's all at 127 degrees, which 127 degrees is still too hot for you and I to get in. It would cook us. Now they do collect the water, and here you can see the pipe coming out of the hot spring where they gather the hot water. The question is, well, what do they do with it? Here's what they do in Thermopolis, Wyoming, which is bitterly cold in the wintertime. They have huge heated swimming pool complexes with water slides and diving boards, and some of it inside, some of it outside, and it's incredibly, incredibly large, especially for the population of the area. Nobody would ever have a heated swimming pool outside in Wyoming that big. It would be impossibly expensive to keep it warm in the wintertime. But because this is free hot water coming out of the ground, you can use it to have a outdoor heated swimming pool. People are swimming in that this month. They're open right now. Even though it's January and there's snow all over the place, you can go there and swim outside because the water is still 100 and something degrees. Now, remember I said the water has so much minerals in it. Everything the mineral water comes in contact with gets caked in minerals. When I was there, I started looking at this and I said, man, it looks like the side of the pool is cracked, like the concrete was breaking up. But it wasn't. Turns out that's the cake of minerals from the water and all of the minerals in the water. And I started talking to some of the maintenance guys that were there and say, oh yeah, we got to go along every now and again and break up and dissolve these minerals, because otherwise it just ends up being all clogged up with minerals. This is that town. I showed you a picture of this earlier. These are all piles of minerals where the water has so many minerals in it, comes to the surface, and it just starts to pile up, make big, huge globs of minerals all over the place. I went to SARATOGA Hot Springs, and this one was incredibly hot. It was so hot that I couldn't get in. So you can see all I could do was get my feet in the water, and my feet turned beet red. And I asked one of the locals in there, said, how do you guys stand this? Why don't you cool the water down? And he said, well, here's what we do is this is a lot more popular in the wintertime, because you come in the wintertime and when the air is so cold, the water doesn't stay as cold and it's more bearable. I went to a couple in Idaho. This one I like because it was a little more natural. It's just a pool of water coming up out of the ground, and it was hot water right beside the river. Now, interesting story behind this. I'm soaking in this. I'm the only person there, and I get up out of it, and I walk over to a bench, start to get changed, put on my shoes, and I turn around and I look. I had just gotten out of this hot spring. I turn around and I look, and I see this. There was a moose standing in the hot spring. Kind of makes sense. Moose like animals, they're mammals like us. They like hot water. They like soaking in the hot water. So the moose came over there and decided to partake of the hot spring. And I wondered if he was just kind of like watching me and waiting for me to get out of the way before he got in the hot spring. But I thought that was kind of neat. Definitely an experience I had not had at any other hot springs. So I went to Lava Hot Springs this past summer. Here's the water bubbling up into the hot spring. And what they've done here is they've collected the water and they made a huge swimming pool complex right over the hot springs. And once again, you can go swimming here right now in January. It's incredibly cold. There's snow on the ground, and people are right now sitting in this hot spring because it's free hot water. They take the water and they run it over different pools. They had anywhere from about 100 degrees up to about 112 degrees. And 112 degrees, that's about as hot as you can stand. In the wintertime, it probably feels good when the air is cold. Like most hot spring towns, it was thought to be good for your body, that had healing properties. So you can see in 1918, somebody came and they built a hotel here, and the the catch to the hook to the hotel was, hey, come and have healing hot spring baths. Because in 1918, a lot of people didn't have indoor plumbing, and they certainly didn't have indoor hot water. So you would go there and be able to take a hot bath, and that was the attraction to going there. And of course, the Coach Weigand hot spring selfie that is themed throughout this presentation. So also in Wyoming is Yellowstone National Park, and I went there, and you can see here's Mammoth Hot Spring, because it is mammoth, and it is a mammoth pile of minerals, and it keeps getting bigger every year because the hot spring water is still coming to the surface. The hot springs in Yellowstone have an incredible array of colors, and they're very, very photogenic. You can see the deep reds and the blues, and you're going to see some oranges, and you're going to see some greens and yellows. Very, very colorful, very, very dramatic hot springs in Yellowstone. And of course, the Coach Weigand hot spring selfie that will forever be associated as being year 2020, because me and the Mrs. Coach Weigand have our mask on in this picture. I did go to one hot spring in Alaska, and the trick is with this one, this is something I always wanted to do. I've always wanted to go to a hot spring in the wintertime, especially someplace cold where there was snow on the ground. And I went there in December. I went there for Christmas of 2017, and it's really cold there. You can see the temperatures. -14 was the high for that, or sorry, -11 is the high temperature for that day. That's it. And you can see at night, oh, sorry, -24 degrees Celsius. It's really cold, but yet you can still get in the hot spring because the air over the hot spring is warmed by the hot water. So, of course, the hot spring selfie. Now, there's something interesting happening here. There's water, there's steam evaporating, and the steam would then make your hair kind of wet, kind of fogs up your hair. But it's so cold outside that it then freezes in your hair. And this is what my wife's hair looked like. You can see how the vapor, the water from the hot spring then got into her hair and froze solid. Unfortunately, it's not as dramatic with my hair because my hair is already fairly white. Did go to a couple in Arizona. This is Verde Hot Springs, and you'll notice it has a concrete deck around it. This looks like somebody made a real swimming pool here, and they did. This used to be a resort, and at some point it burned down, I think in the 1940s, and they never rebuilt it because by that time enough people had indoor plumbing and indoor hot water that, you know, the allure of going to a hot spring resort just to be able to take a hot bath was kind of losing its edge. So you'll see that a lot of places that there are hot springs that used to be big fancy resorts, and once they went out of business or burnt down, they weren't redone because I can stay home and take a hot bath. I don't have to go to this resort. And this one is actually really, really remote. You had to have a Jeep and a 4x4 to get to it. And of course, the Coach Weigand hot spring selfie again. Here I am on the Arizona-Nevada border. This is Ringbolt hot spring. This is also really, really hard water. And I showed this to you earlier. All that white stuff, that's all minerals coming out of the water as it comes out of the walls of the canyon and deposits itself into that hot spring. Arkansas, I showed you this summer that I went, and Hot Spring National Park has all these bathhouses, and I showed you a picture of me sitting, and you see the 3 different tubs there, and they can do the same thing. The water coming out of the ground's pretty warm, 104, 106 degrees, which is almost too hot to handle, especially inside. So they mix it with a little bit of cold water, and you can sit in whichever tub is appropriate for your likes in terms of the temperature. Utah, also both of these were from this summer. Here's one inside of a cave. I showed you a cold water spring inside of a cave. This is a hot spring inside of a cave. And it's called Homestead Crater, and they buried dug a tunnel through the side of the crater. It looks like a little volcano, and you can go swimming in the hot spring. You can also go scuba diving. Here's a picture of what a similar one looks like from the top. This one still has water all the way to the surface. This is Saratoga Hot Springs, which is right near Great Salt Lake, and you can see it doesn't look like much, but it's totally natural. And it's part of a county park. You can walk out there and soak. You can see somebody put a log in there just to kind of sit on. Here is water bubbling up out of the ground. You can actually see the bubbles. You can see that hot water coming up through the soil into this hot spring. Hawaii. Ahalala Ui, sorry, I gotta practice my Hawaiian. Warm ponds in Hawaii. This was about the only hot spring or warm spring in Hawaii. It's pretty good size, about the size of a small lake. You could go there and swim around. They also have in Hawaii, they have natural steam rooms where, remember, the water coming to the surface isn't necessarily always a liquid. It can come to the surface as steam. Well, they have these little caves where it's basically a natural steam room. That's actually where the idea of a sauna or a steam room came from. They were natural originally. Here's another picture of the warm spring, and it's just the right temperature because it constantly gets some water coming in from the ocean, keeps this water from being too hot or getting too cold. Now, I went back to Hawaii in the summer of 2019, and I wanted to go back to this hot spring because these were pretty old pictures. I mean, look, my son, who is 15 now, you can see he was really small, that picture. And I didn't get my Coach Weigand hot spring selfie because I didn't have a cell phone camera at the time. Here's the problem. Volcanoes in Hawaii. The volcano was erupting, and the volcano made a lava flow that covered up where the hot spring was. That's about where the hot spring was. It's very, close. You get the idea. The hot spring's covered in lava now, and now it's under rock. But in Hawaii, you can get a new hot spring. So long as it rains and water goes into the ground, the volcano is still there. The volcano still makes water hot, and the hot water can pop up out of the ground now somewhere else. And that's what's happening with that hot spring that got covered up. Not too far away, there's now a spot where the water has found its way to the surface again, and it's making a new hot spring in a new location. So those are all my ones in the United States. Let's look at some ones in other places across the world. British Columbia, which just in Canada, it's just outside of the United States. Radium Hot Springs, same thing. They built a huge outdoor swimming pool, and you can go swim in it in January because the water is still hot and it's free hot water. Iceland has about 800 different hot springs. They're all over the place. As a matter of fact, as you drive around Iceland, you're just driving down the road, you look over, you see steam come up out of the ground. There are hot springs literally almost everywhere in Iceland. This is a hot spring river. This is where you got a spring coming up and you can see the river, and it's just steaming. It's a boiling river because it's got hot spring water forming the river. So why so many in Iceland? It's actually kind of complicated, but it makes sense when we think about what we learned in the fall. First reason, remember this Gulf Stream brings a lot of water and brings a lot of rain to Iceland. The Gulf Stream makes it where Iceland gets a lot of rain. So you got to have a lot of rain to have a lot of water go into the ground to make a spring in the first place. Second reason is, here's what the ground looks like in Iceland. This is their rock. There's a lot of holes in there. So water can get into the ground very, very easily. The third reason is the heat. Iceland is one big, huge volcano. So it rains a lot, the water can get into the ground, and there's a heat source. There's a volcano there that's going to make the water hot as it comes back to the surface. Here's an example of a hot spring from my trip in 2017. And you can see it's kind of just a natural thing. People put some rocks around it, put in some stairs. That's it. Of course, the Iceland hot spring selfie. This was from 2015. This is in the hot spring river. They even have a hot spring in a cave. Go in this little cave here, and there's hot spring water in there. And the trick is with this. By the way, this cave, for anybody's Game of Thrones fans or has ever streamed it, this cave was used in the movie in the show Game of Thrones. You could use to swim in it. And then there was a volcanic eruption in Iceland. The volcano got more active and it made the water too hot to swim in for a while. Well, now the volcanic eruption in that particular volcano is kind of dying back down, so the water is cooling down enough now where you can start to swim in it again. Went to Mývatn Naturebath, which is what they call this one. And you'll notice the water looks milky because it has so many minerals in it. And they had signs all over the place in the locker room say, "Take off your silver jewelry before going into the hot spring." otherwise you'll damage it. And me, of course, I knew what was going to happen, and I wanted the picture for, educational purposes, so I wore my silver wedding band once again into the hot spring, and you can see it turned it black because there were so many minerals in that water, and it super tarnished my wedding band. Went to the Blue Lagoon, which is probably one of the world's most famous hot springs, and you can see why it's called the Blue Lagoon. It's quite large, and it has a blue tint to it because of the combination of the minerals in it and the way the sunlight hits it. Now you can see that white stuff around the black rocks. This is a whole bunch of minerals that come up out of the water, and the hot water reacts with the black rock, and the minerals in the water reacts with the rock, and it makes this kind of white clay, kind of not sandy, but a clay bottom to the hot spring. It feels kind of slimy and kind of mucky. It's like a clay, and that clay is thought to be good for your skin. And there's a very famous spa there. People go there from all over Europe, and they get mineral treatments, and they get the mask on the face, and get the peels and all that. The thing is, if you're in the hot spring, it's free. You can just reach down to the bottom of the hot spring and pick it up. And of course, me and the missus decided, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So we tried the mineral mask that they provide for you there in the hot spring. Now, let's talk about some practical uses for hot springs. Okay, these are all kind of great as an outdoor heated swimming pool, but let's talk about what can you do? Like, what's the benefit of finding these hot springs? Well, first of all, in Iceland, here's a case where a farmer, he built himself an outdoor heated swimming pool. This is a private person. This is not a city or a town. This is a farmer. He had land. There's a hot spring coming out of the mountain over here, and he just built himself a little swimming pool, and he makes it available to anybody who wants to come by. And they're friendly like that in Iceland. And so one of the first practical uses is, man, you can have a heated swimming pool. And in Iceland, almost every little town has an outdoor heated swimming pool. People in Iceland swim a lot because they can swim year round because they have hot water to swim in. Also, foot baths. If you've ever seen maybe your grandparents or seen something on TV where they have the little tub that old people especially used to put their feet in after a long day of walking, especially if their job involved a lot of walking. You used to set your feet in these little tubs of hot water, and it would make bubbles, and supposed to make your feet feel good. Well, imagine if you had free hot water. Places like Iceland, they have this where you just go and you set your feet in the hot water, and it makes your feet feel good, and it's good for the skin on your feet. Now, getting back to swimming pools. This is a heated swimming pool. And I want you to think about this swimming pool here. If we had this here in Roswell, and we do, Milton, I know, has one. Roswell's got a big municipal pool, and right now they're closed because the water's too cold to swim in. We could heat the swimming pools here in Roswell and Alpharetta, but it'd be very expensive to do so because, remember, water has a high specific heat. It takes a lot of energy to heat up water. Well, in Iceland, they don't have to worry about that. They've got all the free hot water that they want. So every little town has these huge outdoor swimming pools with water slides, and this is only about half the complex. They had an Olympic-sized lap pool where they do swim meets in the winter time because the water is warm. One really crazy, weird thing they do with this hot water in Iceland is they heat the ocean. Now, they do this on purpose. Iceland is an island, but the water around Iceland is too cold. The ocean is too cold in Iceland to go swimming in. So Icelandic children never get to go to the beach and swim in the ocean. So here's what they did. Out here in the middle is a hot spring coming up out of the ground. We got water from a hot spring coming up out of the ground. And this here is the ocean. So the hot spring makes a little part of the ocean warm enough so that Icelandic children can actually go to the beach. So it's crazy. They're using hot spring water to actually heat the ocean. Now, one thing they do with the hot spring water in Iceland is that they capture it and they run it through pipes. They use this water. You see it all over the country. You see these big, huge pipes going alongside the road, and you go up and you touch them, and they're warm. And they're even insulated. What that is, it's hot spring water that they're taking and they're putting somewhere. The question is, well, what are they doing with it? First thing they do is they make electricity. You can use steam to turn a turbine. So you have hot water that's steamy, you can make electricity with it, and Iceland does. Primarily, all of their electricity comes from the steam that is there naturally. They also do this. Nobody in Iceland has a hot water heater. They have free hot water in the ground. It's almost too hot to use straight to your shower. So here's what they do. They take a pipe and they run the hot water into this big tank right here, and they let it sit for a while. And they let it cool down enough till it gets to the point where they can run a pipe to your house so that when you turn on the shower, it doesn't scald you automatically. Now, one thing about the hot spring water or the hot water in Iceland, when you turn on the tap, it'll smell. Because it has a mineral in there, sulfur generally, that has a little bit of a smell to it. So we don't have that here because our hot water heaters are heating up tap water. They're getting their water straight from the ground, and it's got minerals in it, and it will have a kind of a funky smell to it. It's not bad. It just takes a little bit of getting used to. One thing they do in Iceland is they cook food with hot water because they didn't have many trees and they don't have any coal. So years and years ago, think like the Vikings time, they would throw their food into the hot spring and let it cook that way. They would boil their fish, boil their lamb, they would boil it. You can even use the heat from a hot spring to bake bread. So they used what they had, and that's a practical application of hot spring water. They also use hot spring water to keep greenhouses warm because it's way too cold in Iceland to grow vegetables. They have a very short growing season, but they can make the greenhouses warm using the hot spring water. We would never do this in Roswell because it would take too much energy for us to make a greenhouse that size warm enough to grow vegetables in the wintertime. But in Iceland, they have all the free hot water. They can get away with this. They also use it to heat their houses. Nobody has a traditional heater like we have here where you turn it on and it blows air out of the ceiling. What they have is in each room, they have this. This is a radiator. And what's going through this is hot water is going through these pipes. And the air in the room gets warm because that device there, that radiator, is warm. So it warms the air in the room. Some crazy things that they do with it. I mean, they do stuff with hot water in Iceland that just almost defies logic. Here's a shopping center over here. And this is the walkway where customers walk, like going out to the parking lot. And you notice they've got these pipes going under the ground. They're running hot water through those pipes. And what they do now is they're going to come and they're going to pave over this. And then in the wintertime, they run hot water through those pipes and it keeps the parking lot warm. Why would you do something like that? It's so that the snow melts and you don't get icy sidewalks. In the main capital of Reykjavik, they actually heat their sidewalks. You don't have to go out and shovel your sidewalk because there's free hot water that keeps the sidewalks warm enough so that the snow melts and runs off, and you don't have icy, snowy sidewalks that you might trip and slide on. There's even talk of, in Iceland, of doing this same thing here, doing the same situation where they run pipes under the ground at a golf course. Because Icelanders love golf. They play golf like crazy. But in the wintertime, it's too cold and there's too much snow on the golf courses. So there's a plan proposed where they run hot water underneath an entire golf course, and it keeps the snow on the golf course melted, and it drains off, and you can play golf in January. Now, could we do that in Roswell? Sure. We don't really have the snow problem. So Minnesota in the wintertime, they could do it. They could heat the water and keep the snow off of a golf course, but it'd be really, really, really expensive. It would be phenomenal the amount of money you'd have to pay to play golf to make it worth it. Well, in Iceland, where the hot water is free, why not? Now, let's go to Japan. Japan's similar to Iceland. It's a big volcano and there's an island. And just like Iceland, they have made a lot of uses for their hot water. Japan's a very, very old culture. And right in the middle of this old, I mean, 1,000, 2,000-year-old town, there was a well where anybody in the town could come and get hot water for free. And think about that. In the days before hot water heaters, indoor plumbing, If you wanted hot water, you had to make a fire, burn wood or coal, and you'd have to heat up your water. Well, in Japan, people always had access to hot water from the wells that were all over the country. And you see it in every town. You go walk around, you see these big steam vents where they're releasing the pressure from the hot springs that are underneath the town because they're tapping the water. The Japanese, also a big believer in foot baths because they're a very dense population that everybody lives very close to one another, and they didn't have cars, so they walked everywhere. So you would go outside of train stations and bus depots and shopping malls and all these places where you'd have a lot of population, and there's a foot bath. You take your shoes off and you would soak your feet, make your feet feel better before you got up and you walked to wherever else you were going. Here's a foot bath in Sakurajima, Japan. Now, what's unique about this, when I went, and this was 2018, I'm in the shadow of the volcano, and the volcano actually erupted while I was there. You could see the heat and the energy from the volcano. It was kind of crazy to think that, man, here I am, I'm at the base of this volcano, and I'm soaking my feet in water from a volcano that is erupting behind me. Here we are in Beppu, Japan. Another place. I mean, these are all over the place in Japan. Here is a hand bath. Same concept. Here's the hot spring water coming up out of the ground. You'll notice it looks kind of brown and dingy there. It's the same thing. It's the minerals in the hot water that makes it look a little dingy. It's not bacteria. It's not gross. It's just minerals in the water. Now, this led to a very interesting cultural phenomena in Japan because everybody had hot water. Everybody could take a bath basically at any time they wanted to. The Japanese onsen, and onsen is a bath house. Now, you still didn't necessarily have a lot of metal pipes that brought water to every single person's house, but you did have community wells. So what the Japanese did was they built bath houses where you could go and you could take a bath. And generally they were segregated, male versus female, and that's the case here in this one. This is the male side and that's the female side. You would go in, and this was a place where you could go and you could take a hot bath. 1,000 years ago, Japanese men and Japanese women went to these places, and that's how they took their bath. Now, they were all over the place. They weren't hard to find. They were in every little town. That means people in Japan took baths and showers a lot more regularly than, say, people in the Western culture, because they had access to hot water. And it's a tradition that carries on to this day, that the Japanese traditionally have been a very clean, obsessed culture because they have always had the access to hot water to be able to take baths. Now, the onsen, people in Japan still, they have hot water in their houses now. They have indoor plumbing. But this is a cultural thing that people still do. And you go and you take a hot bath. It's kind of a ritualistic thing. And me, as a Westerner, I had to be very, very aware of the protocols. So they consider their hot water very sacred. And here's where the hot spring water is coming in. So the protocols, and they have them for you in English because obviously you're a Westerner. You don't necessarily know what the rules and do's and don'ts are. The thought is that you go in and you clean yourself first. You sit down on one of these little stools right here, and you have hot spring water connected to a hose, and you basically scrub and bathe yourself before you get into the tub for the traditional soak, because you didn't want to take any impurities and have it into the water. And now, when I was there, I was kind of self-conscious, like, okay, how long am I supposed to clean myself? Like, how crazy do I get? And I basically was kind of like mimicking some of the other Japanese men that were there. And yeah, they basically take a full-on head-to-toe scrub for like a lot longer than I would ever take a shower for before they got into the ritual soaking of the hot water. Now, they also use hot springs to cook in Japan. Notice this one. This is called Blood Pond Hell, and it has a temperature of 176 degrees. That'll cook anything. And walking down the street in Japan, because almost anybody can tap the hot water, you'll have these little stalls right beside restaurants or shops where they have hot water coming out, and typically they're boiling objects that you can then buy as a snack to eat. You see, in this case, there's an egg right there. eats boiled eggs, makes sense, easy to cook. You drop your money in this little container right here and take your egg and you go about your way. Here was a different town and a different visit. You see we've got corn, certainly something you eat by boiling, and eggs that you eat by boiling. You would also see things like shellfish and seafood, octopus, anything that you could traditionally boil to cook it, you could find being cooked in these hot spring stalls. My son likes boiled eggs and likes corn, so it was great for us to have a little roadside snack almost everywhere we went. Here is an example of how they cook eggs on a little bit bigger scale. Take a long bamboo pole, and on the end they have a basket, and it's full of eggs, and they just drop it in the hot spring, and they pull it out when it's done. You could put anything in that basket that you wanted to cook to eat. Here's one particular hot spring, and the particular mineral content of that hot spring reacts with the shell of an egg, and it turns it black. Now, the egg doesn't taste any different. At least to me, I didn't really think it tasted any different. But it's a big touristy thing to do, a traditional thing to do, to go there and eat these black eggs from a hot spring. So why so many hot springs in Japan and Iceland? In a word, volcanoes. Yeah, it rains enough in both of them, but the heat source, you got to have a big heat source to make that much hot springs on such a wide scale. And both those places have so many volcanoes that they have enough heat to make hot springs all across the country. Now let's talk about animals in hot springs. I showed you the moose that came and decided to join me in the hot spring in Montana. In Japan, they have a type of monkey. And there's a place where they have a hot spring reserved for them because monkeys are mammals like we are. As good as a hot spring feels to us, it feels good to them. And they come out of the mountains in the wintertime especially, and they hang out in the hot spring, and it's reserved for them. Yellowstone National Park, famous for their buffalo. In the wintertime, the buffalo, they go and they sit in the hot spring. Same thing, it got to feel good to them to sit in the hot springs. And they're big, hairy animals. They can handle the higher temperatures of those hot springs in Yellowstone, whereas you and I would maybe go into them and we would cook ourselves. Now, shifting gears, we go to Iceland and Japan because those are the two big ones. Hungary, and there are hot springs in a lot of different countries in Europe, but Hungary is noted, especially the city of Budapest, their capital, for having exceptionally good hot springs that people went there specifically for. Don't ask me to say the name. I don't speak Hungarian. But this is an example of the types of hot springs that they have in Hungary. There's almost nothing natural anymore. They've all been built up into these big, you see, look like kind of like medieval looking bathhouses, because these have been used for 1,000 years. And this was a place where Europeans could go and enjoy the waters. Some of them reserved for royalty. You see, they're fancy. Here's what the inside of them looks like, because they would have inside and outside. Printed on the wall, they had a list of the mineral content of each of those springs. I've also been to the hot springs in New Zealand. Same thing, a lot, very similar to Iceland. You drive around New Zealand and you just see steam coming up out of the ground in certain parts of the country. Not as widespread as in Iceland, but certain parts of New Zealand, the ground just seems to smoke with steam from all the hot springs. You can see the crazy colors from the minerals that we know to be true in hot springs. Now, one thing they do in New Zealand, same thing that they do in Iceland. They tap those hot springs and use the steam to make energy. They use it to make electricity. They can't run their whole country like Iceland can, but they get a significant amount of power from hot springs. We do this in our country as well. In Nevada, I shared with you that there was a geyser that doesn't work anymore because they've tapped it to make electricity, and the geyser doesn't have enough heat anymore. In Hawaii, where we know there's heat under the ground and there's a lot of water underneath there, they have tapped it and they're experimenting with making electricity, and it was kind of getting rolling. Unfortunately, with the last set of volcanic eruptions from Kilauea in 2018, this area has been kind of overrun with lava, and they're not really sure if they're going to be able to restart this or not, if it's going to be worth it to try to make more electricity from the underground hot water in Hawaii. So that's a fast and furious summary of my hot spring experiences. I'm going to give you a quiz tomorrow. It's very open-ended, and I will make this video present as well. You will not be able to watch the video and take the quiz at the same time. You will have to have watched it first, but you could kind of like skim around and use it as a resource if there's something you're not quite sure you remember.